Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. You hear noises outside, we're having a very rainy morning where I'm at right now. In today's video we are talking about the latest release from filmmaker Leigh Whannell and his adaptation of Wolfman. I posted a video a couple of weeks ago talking about horror films that I was excited about in 2025, and I did list Wolfman as one of those films, mainly because I am a huge fan of Leigh Whannell's prior work. I talked about this in that video, but I've enjoyed his stuff from the early days of the Saw franchise up into his recent work. I really enjoyed his adaptation of The Invisible Man. So I was excited that we were getting a new film from him. That being said, anytime I saw the trailers for this movie or any kind of promotional material, it just wasn't getting me as excited about the film as I wanted to feel. It is an early January horror release. Those aren't always the greatest. I kind of went into it with lower expectations than what I would have liked to have. It did pretty much live up to those lower expectations. Overall, I found this film to be very mediocre. It's a movie that I feel like has a lot of really interesting ideas to it. It's a movie that is trying to say something thematically. We're having themes here around family and especially fatherhood. You can tell that this is a very personal project for Leigh Whannell, but it just doesn't quite live up to its potential, and I think that's probably the biggest disappointment here. So I'm just going to go through and talk about the film and explain what I think was missing, what prevented this from being a truly great film that, again, it had the potential to be. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers for the most part, although I probably will get into spoilers when talking about the ending, but I'll give a warning before that happens. I don't think this is one you really need to run out into a theater and see. The visuals and the sound design are fine, but for me, I just don't feel like there's enough there that warrants going out and paying a lot of money for the theatrical experience. If you do want to go see it in theaters, I'd probably say wait for a matinee showing, or really I would just say like wait for this to come on streaming. Okay, so let's get into the film. My favorite part of this movie is actually the first, I think 15 minutes or so. It starts off as this prologue in a sense, in which you are following Blake, who is the protagonist here. He's the father of the young girl later on in the film, but we start the film with him as a child. And the film starts off in this like isolated farmhouse, and it starts off very eerie right at the beginning, right? Because it's all like cloudy and it's gray, and of course you have the creepy woods that's in the back of the house, and a lot of really great imagery that we're starting off with. Like when he introduces us into this setting and you're seeing the barn and you're seeing the like old generator equipment that's rumbling, and again it just has this sense of dread that it's building up to. We're introduced to Blake and his father. It's set up right away that the father is a bit of a hard ass, very strict with Blake, very much runs his house as a military man. But you do get the sense that his overprotectiveness and his overbearingness is coming from a place of genuine love and a genuine desire to keep his son safe. Like there's a scene where he takes Blake out hunting after breakfast, and at one point Blake goes off out into his own on the woods and does see one of these wolfman creatures running around, and then his father finds him and is scolding him and being like, you can't be running off by yourself in the woods. And he's saying things like, it's really easy to die out here, like dying is a really easy thing to do, you need to be careful. It came across that this is somebody that has probably lost someone that they love. It doesn't get into specifics, but I'm gonna guess probably Blake's mother, since she's not in the picture and we don't really hear much about her. But the father is really giving this sense that he is someone that has experienced losing someone, probably very tragically. And so his defense mechanism of dealing with that is to just be this hard ass with his son, because he thinks that that's the best way to protect him. So immediately I was intrigued by the characters. I was like, okay, we got some like generational trauma going on here. And then when they're out in the woods, this wolfman creature approaches them. So you have this great sequence in which they are running up one of these, like those hunter shacks that you have up in the trees to spot deer right when you're hunting. And so they have to climb up one of those, and there's just this really great tense sequence of them waiting and just listening for this wolfman creature that is stalking them in the woods. And you can just hear the wolfman like slowly climbing up. I thought this opening scene was one of the best scenes of tension in the film. And again, one of the best scenes that really immerses you into this environment of being out in the woods, and you're hearing all of like the cracking of branches. There's no like music coming in, there's no music stingers. It's all very natural in that sense. I really enjoyed the first 20 minutes of this film with young Blake and his dad, and again, to me visually it was the most stunning part of the whole movie. As I was sitting there watching it, I was thinking to myself, like, I know this is not what the whole movie is going to be. If this is what the movie was, I would not be upset about it. We could just like stay here and just have it be a story about Blake and his dad, and maybe his dad gets infected and then his dad starts turning into a wolf, and then it's this kid that is now having to hide and figure out how to get away from his father, who is turning into this werewolf. I know that's a completely different story, but I don't know, to me that seemed like a kind of more interesting story and something that I feel like we haven't seen before, and would certainly raise up the stakes. And again, I'm only saying that because the part with young Blake and his father was definitely my favorite part of this film. And then we jump 30 years later into the future, and that's where, you know, we're starting to have narrative and thematic elements begin to unravel a bit. The film jumps 30 years into the future to adult Blake and his daughter. You discover that he's now living in a big city. I guess it's a New York type place. So you have the daughter that's kind of fooling around, right? There's like these construction barriers out on the street. She's climbing on top of those. She's running into unsavory city people, which results in Blake grabbing her and scolding her in a very similar way that his father would do to him, and being like, hey, you can't be doing that. I'm supposed to be keeping you safe. Like, you need to stop when I tell you to stop. And sure, he's raising his voice to her. She gets upset about it. It's pretty much what you would expect from a father who is trying to take care of their daughter. And then it cuts to the next scene. They're at home. Blake's cooking dinner. His wife Charlotte comes in. She hands him the mail. He's looking through it, and he gets a big envelope from a lawyer's office, basically saying that his dad is now considered legally deceased, because I guess the dad has been missing for a good number of years and nobody knows where he is. And so the state is just declaring that he is officially deceased, and now Blake is in ownership of all of his father's belongings, including his childhood home. I'm bringing this up because I feel like this is a good example of one of this movie's overarching issues with the narrative, and that is the fact that I feel like the narrative beats go by so quickly, and I feel like we needed a couple moments to slow down with the characters and really get a sense of what they're feeling emotionally. Blake, he didn't have a great relationship with his dad, but there's like no emotion there when he finds out that his dad is dead. He just goes to the dinner table and is like, yeah, I found out my dad died. You literally found that out like 2 seconds ago before you sat at the table. And just the way that he's saying it as if this is something he found out earlier in the day and has been thinking about. And then he goes on this monologue about like, oh, now that my dad is dead, I wish I'd gotten to know him better. And, you know, we didn't have a great relationship and I didn't ever try to talk to him. Just this expository dialogue. You could have done this visually by showing us how he's dealing with the grief. Like, if this had been a thing where we cut to 30 years later and we're starting with him getting the letter from the lawyer and being like, oh, okay, my dad is now considered officially deceased. And then we get that scene with him and his daughter where he's scolding her and he's taking on the characteristics of his dad as a response to finding out this news about his father. He's sad about his dad dying. There's a lot of unfinished business there between the two of them. And then he takes that out on his daughter without meaning to. That's a behavior thing that makes for a much more interesting story and interesting characters, rather than what we get in the film, which is just like, well, my dad's dead, so I guess we better go to the house and get his stuff. It's things like that where I wish the film had just slowed down a bit and we could have gotten some stronger emotional beats, because it just goes very quickly and it feels very unnatural in its pacing of just like, oh, I find out my dad dies. Oh, we gotta go to the woods. We're in the woods. We see the werewolf. Bad things are happening. Like, there's really no time to get to know the characters, and that's a problem in a film like this, which is really relying on the fact that you as the audience are going to feel for this family and feel bad about the tragedy that's going to happen to them. So from there, really the next part of the film is them driving out to Blake's father's house, and then of course it gets dark and this wolfman creature that's still living in the woods attacks them, causes them to crash their vehicle, and then breaks through the glass and I guess scratches Blake. It wasn't really clear that he scratches him until later on. My other thing too with this is like, it's not like Blake didn't know that there were weird creatures out in the woods. Again, the prologue sets that up. Part of me didn't really understand, like, why are you so eager to bring your family out into this environment? Like, his whole thing is like, oh, we can go to my dad's house and we can stay there for the summer and we can be a big happy family. It's like, you do really just forget that there were like werewolf creatures running around outside in the woods. Maybe repressed memory, I don't know. Anyway, the family gets attacked, they leave the van, they find his father's house and they take refuge there while this creature is outside stalking them. Now, I really liked that Leigh Whannell was playing with this idea of having these two threatening figures. You have the wolf man that's outside of the house that's stalking the family, and you have the dad that's turning inside of the house, right? So you have an external and internal threat here that definitely helps raises the stakes. There's a lot of great stuff that's happening inside the house, especially with his transformation. The transformation scene, like, yes, it is definitely gory. You do definitely get scenes of him vomiting up blood or vomiting up organs. Of course, the classic, like, nails falling off, teeth coming out. I know there was some controversy around the look of the Wolfman creature, that doesn't really look like what we would expect from a typical werewolf movie. I liked that it went in the direction that it did, again, only because we've seen the like full werewolf transformation at this point. Like, you're never going to be beating the transformation scene in American Werewolf in London. That is like the standard. So I like that this one was at least trying to do something a little bit different. There was definitely a Cronenberg aspect to it, right? Thinking of something like The Fly. The transformation scene, like, it wasn't anything that was particularly mind-blowing. Again, all of the visuals are stuff you would expect to see in a film like this. But I did think there were like some pretty effective moments. Like, there's a moment where his wound on his arm where he got scratched is getting infected and it's spreading, and he's in the corner just like biting at his wound, and he's like all like crouched and you can see like the shadows behind him, and that looked pretty creepy. So there was imagery like that I really enjoyed. There's like one scene where his hearing is starting to get more enhanced, and you just hear these heavy footsteps in the room and you're like, what is that? Is that the wolf man? And he looks over and discovers that it's a spider crawling up a wall. But to him and his new ears that are changing, like, it sounds so loud. And then you get all these camera movements where it's like the camera is like going sideways, like it does like these quick like Dutch angles, really putting you in his perspective as to how he is feeling during this transformation. And I liked that. I thought that was fun. Leigh Whannell does continue to put you in his perspective at various points in the film. You have werewolf vision where you're seeing what he is seeing and everything is very, again, distorted and very like hyper real. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. Like, I can see what he was going for. I think there were just like times where you would see like his world being distorted and you would see his wife and his child and they had a very distorted look to them and their eyes are glowing, and there were moments where I was watching it and I was like, this feels a little silly. Again, I see what he was going for and I like the idea. I just think it needed a slightly better execution. So all the transformation stuff was fine. Again, I think the biggest problem in this film is just that, for me at least, watching it, like, I did not care about this family at all. So when he's going through these changes and the wife and the daughter are reacting to it, like, it just didn't hit on the emotional level that it needed to. If you think of any kind of other transformation body horror type film, again, the one that immediately comes to mind is The Fly. The reason that film works as well as it does, and the reason why it feels so disturbing and tragic to watch this character transform, is because of the relationship between Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis in that movie. The Fly is essentially a story about them falling in love and then losing that love due to his hubris. His ego is a big cause of what happens to him. And because the film does such a good job of setting up their relationship at the beginning, and we get to spend some time with them and you can see like what they like about each other. Again, when the ending happens and he's fully transformed and she, spoilers if you haven't seen the film, is given no other choice but to kill this man that she's fallen in love with, like, it feels tragic. It's a story that stays with you because it hits on all of these emotional beats. Yes, the body horror element in that film is amazing. The payoff wouldn't work as well as it does if there also wasn't those emotional beats masterfully crafted in the story. And you just do not get that here with Wolfman. Again, everything is very fast. You have this couple, Blake and Charlotte, but I couldn't tell you what this couple likes about each other. Like, yes, they're going through some like marital problems, but the film doesn't really give us anything to explain, like, this is why these two people fell in love. This is why you should care about these two people in their relationship. It's set up that she's a journalist and he's a writer, and so I guess they fell in love because of their mutual passion for writing, but I don't even know what kind of writing he does. Is he a novelist? Is he also a journalist? I don't know. I don't know what this relationship is. I don't know what the dynamic is with these characters. I don't really know much about these characters. What also doesn't help this film is the fact that the acting is so wooden. Blake is played by Christopher Abbott. The only thing I know him from is Girls.
Have you seen your nuts? Ew.
Like, I know you're joking, but that's not funny to be like, ew.
And then you have Julia Garner, who, listen, I know people love her from Ozark. I know she's won all the Emmys and all the Golden Globes. I'm sorry, she was so wooden in this entire movie. Like, I don't know if this was a thing where her agent was forcing her to do this. I don't know if she lost a bet. I'm just like, why are you here? Like, you seem so uninterested in this role. Like, she just has the same facial expression throughout the whole thing. Like, to me, she really dragged this film down. And again, I'm sorry if you're a fan of her work. There's just like scenes where her and Blake are talking, and he's trying to convince her to go to his father's house with him for the summer. He's like, oh, you can spend time with our daughter and you can have time to write. And she's just like, I don't know that I can even do that anymore. And he's like, what? You mean writing? Like, of course you can write. You're a great writer. And she goes, no, my daughter. I don't think I even know how to mother her anymore. And I was like, are you a robot? Like, again, they're setting up something interesting here in which you have this woman who's been very focused on her career as a journalist, has not been spending that much time with her daughter. The daughter definitely has a better relationship with her father. She can see that. It is a nice setup in theory, because then when you go on this journey of her having to go all out to protect her daughter from these two werewolf creatures that are running around, you get that moment, right? She gets to prove to herself that she is a good mother, that she can take care of her child. But again, the moment is lost because, one, we don't get any scene with just her and the daughter in the setup to kind of show their strained relationship. You don't need that long to do that. You can do it in really simple gestures and really simple behaviors. That scene with them sitting at the dinner table, it could have been anything of like her trying to tell her daughter to do something and the daughter ignoring her, and then the dad tells her the same thing and she does it. Her trying to show some sort of affection to the daughter and the daughter like pulls away. It could have just been anything like that to set up the mother-daughter relationship so that, you know, when they do have their moment at the end of the film and the daughter is like clinging on to her mom for dear life, we see that journey of where they were at the beginning of the film to where they are at the end of the film. But you don't really have that scene. And then again, the acting here, I don't believe that this is someone that is terrified for their child's life. I don't even believe that they're terrified for their own life. So I'm going to get into the ending here. All I will say, not to spoil it, the film does have this theme that is trying to get across around like fatherhood and parenthood. And there seems to be this like thing where they want to mirror Blake's behavior, especially his overprotectiveness and his overbearingness, to his father. And it feels like the film is trying to make the whole werewolf transformation thing a metaphor for this overbearingness, for this overprotectiveness. It feels like the film wants to link werewolfism with like abuse, or again, just generational trauma. The film wants to present Blake's father as being this abusive figure, it feels like. The problem is that we don't really see that in either Blake's dad or even in Blake himself. Like, sure, overbearingness, sure, overprotectiveness. Like, yes, those can definitely be negative traits. I guess I just don't quite buy using a werewolf metaphor for that. Because yes, while being overprotective can definitely be annoying to the people that you are trying to overprotect, it's not something that I would think of and necessarily think as being abusive in the way that they're, I think, trying to make it. Because again, it does feel like Blake's father does have genuine love for him. You can tell Blake has genuine love for his daughter. It would be one thing if, you know, you're being overprotective by literally locking your family up in the house and never allowing them to go anywhere, and always having to check up on them at every single moment of their lives. Like, that's abusive. But I didn't get that from either Blake or his father. So I just feel like the use of the werewolf metaphor wasn't quite hitting as strong as it wanted to. Not saying that I want a film in which we're seeing people getting abused, but if that's what the metaphor is trying to be, then you do need to make that come across a little stronger in some way. Because by the time Blake goes through his transformation, the question is like, what is the lesson learned here? Like, what was the lesson that this character was supposed to be learning? I guess maybe something like, oh, he needed to learn to let his family go and not be so overprotective. I don't know. Again, there wasn't enough set up in the beginning to really understand the metaphor fully. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the ending now. So if you don't want to get spoiled, click to this timestamp right here. I'm going to talk about the ending for a couple of minutes, starting right now. So just to piggyback off of what I was talking about with the whole metaphor thing, like at the end of the film, you discover that the werewolf creature that attacked Blake is Blake's father. And so you have the wife who's saying to the daughter, like, oh, your grandfather infected his son with his sickness. So again, going off of this idea around like this emotional overbearingness of these two characters and how this has been passed down from generation to generation. Like, I guess maybe it would have been one thing if Blake is presented as being a good dad, but does definitely have these more negative traits to him, right? Being very quick to anger, emotionally abusive in that respect. If he was that way and didn't realize it, if he's still on this belief that like, oh, I'm not like my father at all, but still very much has the traits of his dad. And then in that reveal scene where he discovers that his dad is the werewolf, then that's his like mirror moment where he realizes like, oh my God, I've been acting like my dad this whole time. I've been just as abusive to my family as he was to me. Then it's like, okay, we get somewhat of a lesson learned. I think that would have helped the metaphor come across a bit more clearly. But the thing that I was laughing at by the end of the film is she kills him. And then it's her and her daughter just walking off into the wilderness, and there's a moment of them just like staring and taking in all of the beautiful mountains. But it was just like one of these moments where it felt like, okay, well, dad's dead, but isn't this nature beautiful? And I feel like I see this with a lot of these like Blumhouse horror films that have to do with the family, in which the patriarch just sacrifices themselves for the sake of the family. And then you have like the mom and the kids that are just like standing around afterwards and being like, well, dad died. Oh well. And I can't even blame the wife and the kids, because the fathers in these Blumhouse movies are always so like lame. But again, it just doesn't give for like a satisfying conclusion. Okay, spoiler talk is over. Overall, yeah, I just found Wolfman to be a very mediocre film. You know, it's not like the worst Blumhouse January horror film I've seen. I mean, you know, I had to sit through Night Swim last year, but it's also not on par with Leigh Whannell's other work, which again is just such a bummer to say. Did you see the film this weekend? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you all next week for Presence. And I'm so excited to see a new Steven Soderbergh film in the theaters. Until then, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.